Hello, everybody. Welcome to the Priyanka Neela Krishnan Show. This is Enterprise Security Series, episode 38. I am Priyanka Neela Krishnan, and this is the show for security leaders, CISOs, and business leaders who want the real picture of enterprise data risk and not a sales pitch, right? So, before we begin, my standing note: this is an independent commentary, my own views, not tied to any employer, product, or vendor. Today, we are talking about a risk you cannot fully control and cannot afford to ignore: the access you hand to other companies. The access you hand to other companies. Every vendor you onboard, every tool your teams connect, every partner in your supply chain extends your attack surface into systems you will never log into. And when one of them has a bad day, the consequences do not stay with them. They land on you, on your customers, and in your name. Over the next 15 minutes, I want to change how you think about the word vendor from a line in a contract to a live door into your data. Let us get into it. You can run the tightest security program in your industry and still get breached through a vendor you barely think about. A file transfer tool, a support contractor, a SaaS app three teams use and nobody owns. When their security fails, it becomes your incident, your headline, your regulatory filing. This episode is about the risk you signed for without reading the fine print. I am Priyanka Neela Krishnan, and today we're going to talk about the breach that starts in someone else's building. Here is a truth that does not fit neatly on a compliance checklist. You did not choose most of your attack surface. Your vendors did. Every SaaS application your teams adopt, every integration a developer wires up, every OAuth grant someone clicks through, extends your trust boundary into a system you do not run and cannot see inside. And you inherit the security posture of every one of them. If their access controls are weak, that weakness is now yours. If they get popped, the data that flows through them was often yours. The modern enterprise is not a castle with one wall. It is a web of dependencies, and attackers have figured out that the softest way is actually rarely through your front door. It is through a partner who has a key to it. Let me put a number on how routine this has become. 90% of organizations reported at least one identity related breach in the past 12 months, and a large share of those traced to access that lived in a third party. You do not experience this as a vendor problem. You experience it as your outage, your customers' data on the news, and your name in the filing. The vendor gets a paragraph. You get the headline. That asymmetry is the whole reason third party risk deserves executive attention. Because the consequences do not stay with the party that failed, they flow downhill to whoever the data belong to, and that is you. The old security model treated trust as a place. Inside the network, trusted. Outside, not. You defend the perimeter and slept at night. That model quietly stopped matching reality. Today, your data and your access travel through dozens of external systems and trust travels with them. Your real boundary is not your firewall. It is wherever your data ends up, and it ends up in a lot of places you never security reviewed. A vendor's cloud tenant, a sub-processor you have never heard of because it sits behind a vendor you approved, An integration that was set up for a pilot and never removed. Each of these is a place where your trust now lives outside your control, and attackers are following the trust and not the org chart. Here is a scenario that plays out constantly. Let's say a team adopts a SaaS tool, connects it to your email or your file store with a broad grant, runs a pilot and moves on. The pilot ends, the grant stays. 2 years later, that tool has a breach. And the token that was scoped for a 3-week experiment is still valid, still broad, and still pointed at your data. Nobody made a bad decision. A series of small conveniences added up to a standing door into your environment that no one owns. Multiply that by every integration in your company, and you see why trust travels further than anyone intends, and why the boundary you're actually defending is nowhere near your firewall. Here is the trend line that should end the debate about whether third-party risk deserves a seat at the table. In the 2026 Verizon Data Breach Investigations report, third-party involvement appeared in 48% of breaches, nearly half. Now watch the trajectory, because a single year hides the story. 2 years ago, it was 50%. Last year, it doubled to 30%. 2 years ago, it was 15%. Last year, it doubled to 30%. And this year, it is 48%. 15, 30, 48. So, which means it's growing. That is roughly a 60% jump in a single year. And it has been climbing steadily. Verizon analyzed tens of thousands of incidents to reach this. And so, this is the most credible breach data set in the industry, telling you plainly that the partner ecosystem is now one of the primary ways organizations get breached. When something is present in nearly half of all breaches, it is not an edge case. It is the main event. Let me make the 48% tangible. It means that on nearly every breach investigation, the trail runs through someone outside your organization, and this is happening while overall breach volume is already at record highs. Verizon analyzed over 22,000 confirmed breaches to produce this. So it is not a fluke. What makes third-party breaches so damaging is that they arrive pre-trusted. The vendor already has legitimate access, so the malicious activity writes in on connections your controls were told to allow. You're not looking for an intruder climbing the wall. You're looking for a guest who has already gotten inside using a key you handed out on purpose. And watch the shape of these incidents, because it is what makes them so damaging. A single compromised vendor rarely produces a single victim. It produces a fan out, one breach cascading into every downstream organization that trusted that provider, which is why a 60% year-over-year jump matters so much. It means the blast radius of one supplier failure is widening. When you depend on a shared platform, you inherit the risk of everyone else who depends on it too, and you inherit it silently, because nobody sends you a notice when your vendor's vendor gets sloppy. The lesson is not to stop using shared platforms. It is to know in advance exactly what each one can reach, so someone else's bad day stays small on your side. Let me sharpen where the leak actually happens. Because knowing 48% involves a third party does not tell you what to fix. The 60% year over year increase is the fastest rise Verizon has recorded in this category, and the report is explicit about the mechanics. Attackers are exploiting the connectivity tissue between your tools. What integrations, SaaS platforms, the tokens and grants that let one system act on behalf of another. Think about how many times someone in your company has clicked allow on a permission screen to connect to applications. Each of those grants is a standing credential into your data living in a third party system, usually with no expiry and no review. This connects directly to what we covered last episode. Most of these third party footholds are non human identities. The vendor problem and the machine identity problem are the same problem wearing different clothes. Think about the OAuth point for a second because it is a mechanism most people underestimate. Every time someone clicks allow to connect to applications, they mint a standing credential into your data that lives in a third party system. It usually has no expiry and it is rarely reviewed, and it is almost never counted in your identity inventory. This is the same non human identity problem from the last episode, just wearing a vendor's logo. So, the tools you use to govern your own machine identities are the exact tools you need pointed outward. Third party risk and machine identity risk are not two programs, they are one program looking in two directions. So, here is a reframe. You can outsource the work. You cannot outsource the data, and therefore, you cannot outsource accountability for who can reach it. Most third party risk programs today are built around questionnaires. You send a vendor a spreadsheet, they attest to controls, you file the response, and everyone feels covered. But a completed questionnaire proves one thing only, that a vendor filled out a form. It does not prove your data is safe in their hands, and it certainly does not tell you what happens the day they get breached. The reframe is to stop managing vendors and start governing access. The question is not is this vendor trustworthy in the abstract? It is exactly what data can this vendor's identities reach? Is that the minimum they need? And would you know within hours if that access were abused? That is a data governance question, not a procurement one. Let me make the accountability point concrete. When you sign a contract with a vendor, you're extending your trust boundary, and the signature is not a control. The organizations that handle this well maintain a live view of which external identities can reach which data, and they treat any broad or dormant grant as a finding to close, not a footnote to file. They also read the fourth party risk, the sub processes their vendors rely on, because your data often travels one more hop than the contract is in front of you describes. The reframe is simple to say and hard to do. Manage the access, not the paperwork. The paperwork proves diligence, but the access is what actually gets breached. Coming to the three practical moves. First, map data to vendors. Take your most sensitive data sets and list every third party and every integration that can reach them. If your team cannot produce that map in a week, that gap is your first and most important finding. Second, kill the standing grants. Audit your OAuth tokens and integration permissions, revoke everything unused, and scope what remains down to the minimum. A dormant grant with broad access is a free entrance, and attackers love free entrances. Third, rehearse the vendor breach. Do not wait for the real one to happen. Run the scenario where a critical vendor is compromised tomorrow and ask 3 questions. Can you see exactly what their identities can access? Can you cut that access fast? Can you tell what data was exposed? If any answer is no, you have found your work for this quarter. A note on rehearsing the vendor breach. Because it is the move most teams skip, when a major provider is compromised, the difference between a bad week and a catastrophe is how fast you can answer 3 questions and act. What could this vendor reach? Is that access still necessary? Can we cut it now? If those answers require a week of emails, you have already lost the initiative. Run the drill on Tuesday when nothing is on fire. Find where you are blind and fix that before an attacker forces the exercise on your worst day. Preparation is the only part of this you fully control. Control the controllables. The key takeaway is simple and it is not comfortable. Your security is only as strong as the least careful company holding your data, and you're holding data with a lot of companies. The good news is that this is a governable problem. When you shift from managing vendors on paper to governing what their identities can reach in practice, third-party risk stops being a spreadsheet exercise and becomes something you can actually control. In the next episode, we come back inside your own walls and look at a door that was open the whole time. The known vulnerability, publicly disclosed, that never got patched, and why patching alone will never catch up. I am Priyanka Neela Krishnan, and thanks for watching. So carry this forward. Your attack surface is a negotiated thing, extended every time your business adopts a tool or signs a partner, and most of it lives in systems you will never log into. That is not an argument against working with vendors. Modern businesses run on them. It is an argument for governing the access those relationships create with the same seriousness you govern your own. Because when the least careful company holding your data has a bad day, the market does not blame them, it blames you. This is my source slide. This is where I got my sources checked. This is the episode 38. The one line to carry out of it: your attack surface is negotiated, extended every time your business adopts a tool or signs a partner, and most of it lives in systems you will never log into. So govern the access, the access those relationships have created with the same seriousness you govern your own, and rehearse the vendor breach before an attacker forces the drill. If this was useful, please do subscribe and send it to whoever owns third-party risk or procurement in your organization, because this is a shared problem. Tell me in comments how many active third-party integrations you think you have, and then go find the real number. It is always higher. I am Priyanka Neela Krishnan, and this has been my independent commentary on enterprise data security, and I'll see you in the next one. Until then, stay safe, stay secure. Bye, everybody.